back on page 40, he says, there is no possibility of avoiding this. This is the second paragraph. We can make no contact with men unless we speak to them in their language. Many men, in declaring that they believe in God, assume that God is identical with reality. And reality there has a capital R. So Van Til's surveying the landscape of the philosophical scene around him, and he's saying they use the word God, but they don't mean by that word what we mean by that word. They keep using that word, but I don't think they know what is it, whatever that line is from Princess Bride.
Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Thank you for catching that, even though I butchered the line. You keep using that word. So it's inconceivable that Van Til would want to make common cause with their notion of God because they see God, in quotes, as identical with reality, capital R. Okay, Lane, what's he getting at here? What does he mean by the philosophers speaking of God, quote unquote, as identical with reality?
Well, now we need to transport ourselves back in this particular instance to Van Til's own philosophical and theological milieu. And what he means by that language, especially given the philosophies of his day, was that many believed that God, the absolute, is nothing more than an aspect of the universe. It is the eternal aspect of the space-time continuum. For instance, absolute idealists believed that when the absolute related to the world, it began to change and develop along with the world. And there are two versions of this. I'm going to call one an historical version and the other a logical version, just to give you some background. Hegel believed that absolute mind is developing along with and through all finite minds. And as it does so, it gains more and more universal and particular knowledge. Those who are familiar at all with Hegel, a thesis generates its antithesis. And then there's a synthetic movement that brings together those things that are polarized through a dynamic, dialectical, historical process. So without getting into the details of Hegel, Hegel believed that the absolute is slowly coming to self-consciousness and is dependent on finite minds for that process of development. Bernard Bosanquet, a different idealist from a British and French side, he said that reality is a single system and that God supplies the eternal aspect and the world supplies the temporal aspect, and they're two aspects of one entire reality. God and the world exist in a series of logical relations in what Bosanquet called a system. God and the world are part of one logical system. And so God's existence and the world's existence are two aspects of mutually implicating realities. Now, without getting into the details of that, instead of drawing a line like Hegel does, Bosanquet draws a circle. And the absolute mind for Hegel and finite minds are in a process in history moving dialectically together, developing together. For Bosanquet, the absolute and the temporal, the eternal and the temporal, are part of one logical system. And Van Til's saying that whether or not you find the absolute developing along with history, Hegel, or supplying the eternal side of a system of inferential relations, like Bosanquet, both of them see reality as inclusive of God and man in some kind of mutually supportive and interdependent relationship. And so that what Van Til's saying is when people talk about God and when they talk about the universe and they talk about God's relation to the universe, they're thinking about God as being inseparable to the world and identical with its historical and inferential processes. And so it's a form of correlativism.